Ruth Bater Ginsberg, or as she's belovedly known as Notorious RBG, held the title of Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States for 27 years. During that time, she made impressive feats in the American justice system to reserve equal rights for women and minorities. She stood by the word of until women and men are on an equal playing field in society, the Constitution cannot withhold its words of protecting liberty for all. I wish I had the time to fully explain all that RBG has done, but I will highlight a few important cases that she helped bring forth that gave the true liberty that women and minorities were denied. The Constitution never mentions women or the feminine pronouns. This excluded women from many rights for years. However, RBG noted this and pulled from the 14th Amendment, which states, quote, "No state shall deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws," end quote. Using this, Ginsberg took this opening in the Constitution to start incorporating the equality that was legally promised. She also used the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote, and she also pulled from the Civil Rights Act. So now let's dive into some of the most famous cases that she was a part of, starting with her fight for women and the reproductive laws. In 1973, we have the famous Roe Vs Wade case, which made the ability to have an abortion a constitutional right. With Roe focusing more on the privacy of the citizen, which Ginsberg found important, she felt that it was, and more so important, that women's right to have an abortion follows women having equal standing with men in society, something that she feels was protected in the 14th Amendment. She did withstand some losses, but she never backed down from her views. Because of how Roe was set up, it allowed for open ends that could still put women at a disadvantage, but she creatively found ways to ensure that justice for women, such as with the case of the Whole Women's Health versus Hellerstedt, where she stated, quote, "When the state severely limits access to safe and legal procedures, women in desperate circumstances may resort to unlicensed rogue practitioners at great risk to their health and safety," end quote. In Gonzalez versus Carhart, she criticized and spoke out against the majority's willingness to allow for limitation of the abortion right, allowing for partial birth abortion bans. Ginsberg not only spoke out about how it violated women's reproductive rights, but she also criticized the majority's very faulty and wrong understanding of the associated medical procedures. She tied both the equality and privacy into one when she said, quote, "Legal challenges to undue restrictions to abortion procedures center on a woman's autonomy to determine her life's course and thus to enjoy equal citizenship stature," end quote. While women's reproductive rights were accepted in the frame of privacy by the majority, Ginsberg was still in the minority for the framing of it as an equal citizenship right. In Burrow versus Hobby Lobby stores, she disputed that Hobby Lobby denying contraceptive coverage for religious reasons needed to be brought back to the statutory interpretation of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, and how it connects to the liberty of gender equality found in constitutional values. Quote, "The ability of women to participate equally in the economic and social life of the nation had been facilitated by their ability to control their reproductive lives," end quote. The next clause we shall focus on is her view on the Equal Protection Clause. She uses to secure that citizens, no matter their race, gender, orientation, or any other marginalized identity, will be under equal status under the law. Ginsberg's approach to the cases where it involved a marginalized group was not to act color, gender, or what have you blind, but instead to take necessary steps to secure stereotypes, certain classifications, or plain discriminations did not get in the way of these marginalized groups and their rights to the full access of the law and the Constitution. In the case of Ledbetter versus Goodyear Tires, Ginsberg was again not on the winning side of the case, but she fought for equality for equal pay for women. Having been the victim of unfair wage gap herself, Ginsberg let it be known that she rejected the very narrow view that the majority had on the Civil Rights Act, which they used to say that Ledbetter waited too long after the 180-day statutory charging period. Ginsberg retorted with, quote, "In our view, the court does not comprehend or is it indifferent to the insidious ways in which women can be victims of the pay discrimination," end quote. In the case of Adirondack Construction versus Pena, the majority sided with Adirondack. Adirondack's standpoint was that they were unfairly passed up for a contracting job because the other company, Gonzalez Construction, was chosen because they were a minority-led company, to which the contractor would receive more money for hiring and partner with the provision of added funding by most federal government contracts as an incentive to hire minority-led groups. The court let in rule in favor of Adirondack, stating that the race-based classification system cannot survive the scrutiny under Equal Protection Clause. However, Ginsburg argued and made it clear that she did not agree with this ruling. She emphasized something which was stated before, quote, "The Equal Protection Clause was not meant to be blind race or gender. Rather, it demands policies that are meant to advance true equality for groups that have been traditionally marginalized in society," end quote. Lastly, I will talk about the case she was the majority on, which was the 1999 Olmstead versus LC. In 1990, Congress passed the American with Disabilities Acts, which banned discrimination based on disabilities in employment, transportation, and access to state services. In the case of Olmstead versus LC, 2 women who had psychological disabilities were to remain institutionalized against their will, even though they were determined to be stable enough for community-based help by professionals. Ginsburg ruled that under circumstances such as these, quote, "The ADA requires disabled patients to have the opportunity for community-based care. A patient's choice cannot be between institutionalization and nothing," end quote. With this case, it showed that Ginsburg's fight for equality and liberties extended to all. It wasn't just about race and gender. That her core focus for America was for it to uphold what it said it stood for. With just these few cases mentioned, one could see how incredibly influential Ruth Bader Ginsburg was and still is. She was able to get past the obstacles that were put in her way, being essentially demoted from her Social Security Administration job after becoming pregnant with her daughter, having to help her husband, who was unfortunately diagnosed with cancer, with assignments at Harvard Law, where she too had to complete her own coursework while raising their child. She transferred to Columbia and she still graduated at the top of her class. She faced rejection after rejection post-law school, even though male colleagues with the same resume easily got a job. She overcame so much adversity and fought to get where she ended. For many women, she is a hero and she is looked up to in great admiration. A quote from her that many women can live by is, quote, "My mother told me to be a lady, and for her, that meant to be your own person. Be independent," end quote. So in celebration for International Women's Month, go and be a lady.